Why, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Innovantage Podcast, where business meets tech to bring you your competitive edge. As always, I'm your host, Max, and it is my ongoing duty and my job to explore that edge between business and tech and to find something interesting for you to talk about. Today's topic is a very interesting one. We're going to be talking about team topologies. We're going to be talking about decision making in business leaders and tech leaders, and we are going to be talking a little bit about the cloud as well. And to help me on that journey is one Thiago de Faria, who is the modernization specialist for AWS. Thiago, hi, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hey. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? How did your career look like? Because from what I've seen on your resume, it's just a trip. It looks fun. It sounds fun. I don't know whether it was fun, but tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I think it is fun on hindsight. When you're there grinding, it's fun also at some points, but there is always this moments of like, is this really what I'm doing? But anyway, my name is Thiago. I'm originally from Brazil, but I left some time ago. I will spare everyone all the details and all the things that come with it. But for the last decade or so, I have been working a lot into the intersection of data, distributed systems, and the actual organizational impact that comes with it. Because after a long time working on this, I realized that it's not just the algorithms or the tech or the new tools that matter, it's the communication, how people interact. So I decided to have more leadership positions in the last decade. So I was CTO, I was director, I was team lead. Uh, then I joined AWS to lead startup teams of solutions architects, so mainly working with early stage startups. Then I went out of AWS to freelance for a few years. And now I just came back as a modernization specialist to help enterprises on that transition and to help them into know that this is way beyond tech. Tech is, again, the least of our problems.
So what it is about then, if not about tech?
It's about people. It has always been. It's about people and communication and how to align how people behave, how people act, what they say versus what is actually happening. The business is about ego, it's about being kind. All of this stuff come together to build sustainable business. Otherwise, we just end up in the old way, in the Jack Welch way of telling people, you have to do this because I'm the boss. And we have seen that people are driven by many, many different perspectives. It's not just about the money, it's not just about the stick. So the stick and carrot thing working for a long time, but it's not working anymore. So we need to find the drive behind people and how to make that work in technology.
So how do you do that then? I'm guessing this is where Team Topologies comes into the picture.
Yeah, I think that Team Topologies, for people that do not know this, I actually have the book here close to me now. It's always together with me, kind of. When Matthew and Manuel wrote this, the two authors, Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais, it came from away from DevOps, from that whole evolution, coming from Lean, from Agile, from Demings, from the goal, into align the idea, the business outcome, with the tech and the execution of it. And that means essentially a fast flow, like getting from idea to production as scrappy as possible if you can. Of course, taking into account the security, the compliance, and all the things that come with it, so that you can gather feedback. Because over planning, overdoing, and doing too many stuff will harm in the end your process because there is no actual feedback that you can get from thinking about something that can compare to the actual putting the product in front of the customer. Team Topology came as a way to discuss and give a language, giving the semantics on how you can structure teams, and how do they interact amongst themselves. Because we have been living under this idea that we need to communicate all the things that we do all the time. But without standards, without proper ways of doing that, you end up over communicating and you end up sharing too much context, and that ends up bringing what we call the cognitive load, where people have just to know too much about things that they kind of lose track with what they actually have to do. So you have to know about your Java classes and how to do your deployment and how is your context of your team and who is the customer that you're talking with. You start to go into this spiral of oversharing, over context, and you just cannot cope with the focus that you should have.
Hmm.
And team topologies give that semantics, that way to discuss again what kind of teams do we have and how we can structure them so we can bring them closer to teams that have ownership, that have the least amount of handovers possible to get from idea to the hands of the customer.
Sounds like an excellent framework. An excellent framework that should follow, the most modern principles of building a tech business in one way or the other, or to manage tech teams in one way or the other. And that's, I'm not a tech person myself. I'm more leaning towards the business side of things, even though I work in tech a lot. Um, my immediate question to you would be, is this a framework that is applicable on the team level or on the project level or the program level or on the portfolio level, or what levels are mostly influenced by team topologies then?
Yeah, so within team topologies, we always think in the concept of the minimum working unit is the team.
Mhm.
That does not mean that we do not care about the individuals. No, it's just that we go beyond that to say that the output of the teams and what the teams actually do is matter most than the heroism that we have of having one person that knows it all and do it all. However, the concepts of it, the concept of fast flow, the concept of moving from idea to production, that applies at different levels. And team topologies, just to clarify, it's not a specific framework or a way that you say like you need to apply team topology at your company and do a reorganization of the things. No, we actually think that it always started with identifying your value stream, identifying where things are. So it's nothing completely new. Value streams exist for a long time. We also talk a lot about wordley maps into how to map the strategy of the business or of the product. We take into account a lot of things related to domain driven design, how to break your process and your applications in ways that you have domains and subdomains and context that you might know. And all of that come together in a set of practices. And team topology is one part of it, and it's the semantics part on how to communicate, how
Mhm.
this team should interact with the other, and what kind of teams are we talking about here.
Okay, makes sense. Makes sense. So how do you then implement? Because it sounds like a whole culture revamp for a collection of teams that you need to do. So do you do it from the top down or from the bottom up? Or is the only way is to hire you as a consultant and just
No,
break
no.
everything?
I wish, but no. No, it is a big change. And of course it is not something that I can say it's top down or bottom up. It is a combination of both. But we know that big cultural changes take years, months, quarters, whatever you want to talk about it. So that changes a lot. However, it comes from a combination of making people aware of the context that they operate, make people aware of the process, map that value stream and try to identify bottlenecks on it, try to diminish the number of handovers in that process. And going back to the DevOps principles and like all of it, in the technical side, go to we have a continuous integration, we have continuous deployment in place, we have a fast feedback loop to the things that you put into production to back to you. So talk about trunk-based development. We talk about testing. We talk about many other aspects. So it's a lot of different perspectives where we try to align where the business is going, what is the situation of the tech part, and also it's not about pointing fingers and saying tech should be driving and business is doing wrong or anything like that. No, like everyone is at fault here in how we build stuff. Tech people also need to be much more involved into the business and much more curious on the customers and the business. It's very, very uh, easy to get into the we are a tech team. We know everything about Kubernetes and Java and the new things and serverless. And now we're going to change things to Rust because it's way more performatic. And I just want the product manager, the product owner, or the product team or the business side to give me requirements and I'm going to build it. That mentality is one of the biggest changes that we need to do because we shouldn't be working as a in a factory settings in a way that you give them hardcore requirements and they go with it because we don't know, like there are so many unknowns when you're building software for a lot of the cases that you need to have that constant feedback all the time. And if you go into that, you need to write this documentation and give me requirements and put this into Jira, Asana, whatever, and then I'm gonna talk to you back and in 1 month you get something out of it. You lose so much out of that scope that you really need to move towards doing things together.
So would you say then the main challenge becomes, I don't know, building the pathways between the infrastructure that you already have in place and the culture that you already have in place, finding the pieces that are lacking, filling them up, and then tying them all together? Or is the
Yep.
challenge somewhere
Yeah,
else?
it is. It is that big cultural change that needs to be implemented, but it cannot come just from top to bottom in a sense of here's a set of principles, here's a set of mandates, go and do this, because those things usually work in sunny days, I like to say. And everything is
Mm.
okay. You're meeting deadlines, your customer is happy, you're growing. As soon as a problem arises and you go into a rainy day, that's when you see if the actual culture exists. If there is actually blameless, if you actually incentivize people to get ownership, if you let teams make decisions on their own and they are okay with taking that ownership. Because majority of the times what we have nowadays is everyone says that they have ownership. Everyone says that they do this. However, when a problem arises, application goes down, a data leak, a deadline that is not met, nobody want to take responsibility for that because responsibility is really painful. And sometimes you don't want to take responsibility because you have valid reasons to say, I did my part, but that other part didn't, or there was this handover and this was not met. And that's where fast flow comes into it. And that's the essential part. If we reduce the team cognitive load, the amount of knowledge that you have to have like on your brain all the time to actually achieve a business goal, and you just focus on the task at hand, the feature at hand, in pleasing the customer and making them happy at hand, you have way more time and space to have ownership. You have way more time to have less handovers. So in practice, what we do is a set of things. Like I said, map the value stream, identify the teams that are there, what are the most important things that they are doing, assess if they're not doing too many things at the same time. And that means, again, a really, really high team cognitive load. And by doing that, we can make them focus. Because nowadays, a lot of the teams have this schizophrenic push to keep the lights on and all this chaos that you have on, but also do not forget to innovate and to add these new features. But the priority is new features because that's what we're selling. But if it goes down, it's also a problem. So, how do we keep that in check? How do you keep that in balance and how do you prioritize? that usually comes from having people aware of their value stream. Where do I enter and which value I'm adding for the customer? What are my bottlenecks? How can I do this? So you can surface, hey, this is what we need to do. And we do that again. Value streams, making people aware, assessing their team cognitive load, and importantly, checking their technical architecture. How is it going? What decisions can we make? So we have different angles to look into this, but it's always a combination of people, process, and technology. Like we need to look at those three things all the time.
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. So, like you said, there's a particular challenge of actually implementing team topologies, and implementing changes to culture in any direction is very hard. And saying that you take ownership seriously, and ownership is one of your key values as a company or as a team even, is easy, but actually doing that is very hard. So what would your practical advice then be to implementing those kinds of changes to a culture, to implementing it at least maybe on the team scale, or maybe a little bit higher on like a program level?
Yep. Yeah. I wish I had a single answer that will be available to every customer in every setup, because it's not that simple. Because one of the first things that we need to have in place is the concept of psychological safety. And achieving psychological safety within a team and within a company is really, really a tricky one, because you might have people on a team that feel safe, some people that do not. And in that sense, is the team safe? Usually no. You have someone that doesn't feel safe in the team, that means that the team is not safe. And that might arise from many different things that are maybe sometimes outside of the scope of the team or of the business. So, and the first thing to have psychological safety that you have to start working on is trust. You need to trust each other. You need to trust the decisions that people are taking. You need to trust the decisions that management are taking. And the easiest way that I see for putting trust out there is surfacing the assumptions and ensuring that you explain the reason. People don't need to agree with everything that is decided, but they need to see that it is rational. I see your point. I do not agree with it, but you are on that position of a CEO, a director, a manager, or a tech lead. I do not agree with your decision, but I understand it, and let's go with it. And that needs to happen without remorse, without I told you so if something goes wrong. Because that's when people don't want to take ownership. Is when they feel that if I propose something, people that do not like it are going to hold it against me if something goes bad. And that principle of you can disagree to something, but you're still going to commit for the best of the team and the company is really hard to achieve, because we're talking about egos here. Everyone is the hero of their own story. So, how to achieve that? We can go to literature, we can go to people, we can go to all of it, but it is a lot of unspoken acts, a lot of things that happen that make a team feel safe. However, one of the things that I can tell you that happens that helps a lot is building diverse teams. Do not have only bearded white males in a team that come from a specific side of the country. Have different people with different perspectives and make it okay to disagree and make it uncomfortable. That is one of the most important things that I tell people. Like, you have to be uncomfortable with your teammates every now and then, and you need to be able to work with it. Don't suck it up and just move on with it. By doing that, you start to have psychological safety at the team level, and that will make it psychological safety uh, grow. Psychological safety cannot be from top to bottom. You cannot impose psychological safety.
Indeed. Indeed. I completely agree with you here. in our own company, we've always strived to build that culture of ownership. And from personal experience, I can definitely say that, yeah, first of all, it's very hard to do. It definitely does not come down from top down, where I just come into work one morning and say, "Hey, everybody that's in my teams, at the very least my teams, now we take pride in our ownership. Now everybody needs to own their tasks, own their problems, own their mistakes, and own the solution to those tasks. Now we take ownership seriously. Yay, let's write a document saying that we do." It does not work. But I wouldn't call ourselves perfect by any means. But we have been working on this for a long time. And I agree again, like I said, that the things that actually work is creating that sort of psychological safety. And that psychological safety is very different, especially when you work with diverse teams. So a psychologically safe environment for like a woman, for example, is by default to not be surrounded by like 10 men in the same team, because it's already, kind of unsafe, especially if there's this flare of toxicity that is sometimes present. So there are things that you really need to be aware of, and some things are obvious while others are not obvious at all. But I definitely feel that that is a very large contributing factor to building that sort of culture. So it's nice to hear that
Yeah,
that's supported, not just by gut feelings.
no, it is, and there are studies on this around the impact of psychological safety in the bottom line of companies, and that actual part, the link to the diversity. And one of the things that is important to note is that, again, people are not making unsafe environments or treating people perceived unfairly because they want to be evil or anything like that. No, I truly believe that the majority of the workers, directors, managers, people that are working on it, they're doing the best with the context and knowledge that they have. The intent that they have when they express something, when they communicate something, is very, very different from the impact. And I have thousands of examples when I go help companies. Like I once had a CEO that told me, "Yeah, Thiago, I hear people talking about psychological safety. I think that here everything is good because my door is always open. They can always come and talk to me." And I'm like, "How many times has that happened with something that you were like shocked?" And they didn't know. And when I talk to the teams and the individuals in a trust environment, in a one-on-one setup, that they know that me as an external, and they know me, they know I'm not going to be like ratting them out. There are a lot of things that they want to share with the CEO, but they don't want it because they'll be like, okay, if I share with them about this, I'll be creating a conflict or something that might surface with my manager, my director, and they are the ones that pay my salary, that decide my performance, that can tell me, hey, you are this is not good. Uh, you are making a problem out of a small thing. Uh, and that feeling of not being able to call for help or to surface a problem is way more common than we would like, because people have their own context. And you can say as much as you want, you can laugh as much as you want, you can try to be as friendly as you want in a position of leadership. What you say doesn't come fully as truth to people that you're talking to. You have an intent, but the impact is different. Because in social culture, in pop things, in movies, in like all of it, you always have the image of the manipulative manager or the evil person and all of it. These are the exceptions. However, it is finally incarcerated in people's mind that there is always an agenda behind every action. Surfacing that agenda, making sure that I'm talking to you about this problem because this concerns on X, Y, Z. I'm assuming that this is happening because of this. This is what I am feeling about this. Having those kinds of discussions are way more important than any framework or anything that we talk about, because that is the only way that teams can feel, again, part of the organization, motivated by it, drive by it. Like, we have a few intrinsic things that make us motivated to go to work. Some people are way more focused into the money in the end of the month. Some people are more focused on the belonging part. I need to be part of a community or a team. Some people are more about the purpose of their job or their company. Some people are more 9 to 5. I just want to work the basic, get my salary, and I get the majority of my joy outside of work. So you need to be able to surface those things and to respect those things amongst the team, to not create a team of equals, that everyone is motivated by the same thing. And you need to make that transparent.
I feel that's why I like the agile instrument of moving motivators when you're working with a team. It always kind of shows you at least the kind of the default layout of what's important to your team members and where you ideally want to drive every single one and what kind of environment they thrive within. But I'm
Yeah,
guessing that you
and
cannot just do it with one tool.
no, and one of the most interesting things that came from the team topologies and the patterns on it is the concept of platform groups. At first, it was called platform teams, but then we realized that that would be a little bit more limited. So we call it platform groups. And the platform groups are teams that are responsible for creating internal platforms. For example, if you have a tech team that we call a stream aligned team, a team that is aligned to the value stream, that is aligned from delivering something from idea to a customer on it, they need to think about many other parts of it. Where I'm going to save the data, which database do I use, where am I going to deploy this, how can I do my continuous integration, my continuous deployment, what do I do for tests, what is the infrastructure. If you have to think about all of that, plus all the knowledge that you need to have about the programming languages and the patterns that you need to use, and the architecture, and the business side, and talk to the customer, is just too much. That's why a lot of the teams just focus on the technical part, because going into the business part, like understanding that flow, it takes a lot of effort and it's very domain specific. So what a platform group is supposed to do is to provide you tools, building blocks, and tell you, hey, you want to do a deployment of a Java application now on our company? We have this pathway to go through Kubernetes. Here is the documentation. I'm going to help you on board on this as a team. Then you can do this on your own. And it becomes natural. It's almost like driving a car. You do it one time, 2 times, all of it. And then it's like, I don't have to think about it. Removing that cognitive load and having those building blocks is really, really an important part. And those are the platform groups. The caveat there is that a lot of companies started to say, okay, now I have a platform team. We have this concept of platform engineering. We have a team of 10 people doing platform engineering. However, those 10 people have to handle the CI/CD, the infrastructure, the data platform, the this, the that, the Git. They became overloaded with their platforms on its own because their customer, their value stream is internal. So you started to have like internal platform teams that just became too bloated. They had to manage too many things. And that's where
Hmm.
we change it to the platform groups and ensure that people have specific ways to do that so you don't overdo things because you start to expect too much. And these people are supposed to build APIs and building blocks. So the other concept that arise on the team from the team topologies is the concept of enabling teams. Teams that work together with other teams in a facilitating way, like a team that is really good in distributed systems architecture, and then they become almost like your solutions architect working inside a company, that they go with a team, they facilitate a few things, they help them identify the patterns and how they can deploy stuff, and then they fly away to another team. It's almost like an internal consulting. They are enabling your organization as a whole, and that's their job. They are facilitating. So When you start to map these teams and the kind of interactions that they have amongst themselves, that's the beauty of the team topologies and the semantics that comes from, okay, if we have space for that, if we remove the cognitive load that these teams have and give them space to think about the entirety of their value stream, how do they deliver business value, that's where we need to excel. And that is a big change because some people don't want to focus on the business value. They just want the shiny new object. And those people need a wake up call.
Indeed. So far, we have talked a lot about the human side behind every team, the importance of culture, and how that overall impacts the efficiency of an organization. So, all very human centric, very humanistic things. And let's talk a little bit about the tech side of it. I want to talk about the cloud, considering that you work with AWS in AWS and with. I'm sure you have a bit of an opinion on how the cloud exists today and where it's going to be tomorrow. So, what do you see, like over your career? How do you see the cloud just evolving just from infrastructure to maybe an enabler of most modern systems that are being developed and are being, well, out there servicing customers?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I come from a world where we had at some point data centers and plug in cables and talk about networking and buy racks. And that was a way that was almost impossible for new companies to start without a huge investment. And that's where cloud made the biggest change. It allowed people to start their compute, their storage in a way that is requires way less capital initial investment. Uh, that was the biggest change that I've seen in my career up until this AI thing now, because that allowed again ideas to come into fruition in a way that you didn't require to go to a bank and get like dozens of thousands of dollars to have a rack or do things like that. However, as a second evolution of that cloud environment, the unlimited pay as you go kind of a storage compute network, it came the concept of serverless and new patterns started to emerge that allow teams to focus way more in the business problem than in the technological problem. And that goes again similar in but almost in parallel with the team topology stuff. Running things as services that I prefer to call service full than serverless. Run things service full in cloud. It allows people to focus and spend a lot less time into the details of how to run this. And I think that that was the biggest change because new patterns emerged, new ways of doing stuff, and allow again companies to focus on the business instead of the complexity that it was managing their IT infrastructure, make sure that everything is there. People that didn't experience data center life 2005 and before that 2010 or even a little bit before that do not remember the pain that it was when we need to deploy a new thing, when we need to change a rack, when we need to spend a lot of time and effort in like almost in project management mode to ensure that all our products, all our infrastructure was in place, and how far that was from the business goal. Because if you're building a website, the customer does not care if you're running that in a AIX server from IBM or if you're running that in a Fujitsu Blade, or like they do not care. So we need to abstract that away from the teams that have built that in a way that is as close as possible. Does that mean that nobody should run things on premise? Not at all. There are workloads that make a lot of sense. And one of the hardest things that you can do is change. If you have a company that has been running in a specific way for 5, 10, 20, 30 years and they have built expertise on it, tell those people that their job is unnecessary and we're moving everything into the cloud is a huge change. So that's where the human aspect side comes of it again. You need to enable those people, you need to help them. However, some people do not deal well with change. Actually, the majority do not deal well with change. And that's why change management is so important. And not the technical side, the process and human side of it.
So, how does adapting a cloud-first approach in building any product influence that culture, that team? Is it a positive influence or a negative one, or a net zero influence? And then it's the team's job to actually develop a culture that supports cloud as more than just an infrastructural solution to a very simple problem, and expand their own abilities to service the clients in the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that the majority of the companies that are going through this transition now of cloud first, I actually moving towards a cloud first until compliance or cost or anything come in a way. And how customers can work with that, it is a lot on the, again, I, I will keep talking about this, but the psychological safety part of it. Because a lot of the biggest problems that I see with companies try to implement cloud first mentality and not going well is that they have thousands of workloads. They have extensive VMware implementations. They have a lot of old things that they decided to not touch before because they were running okay. They are almost like mainframes, even though they're not officially mainframes. And all of a sudden, they want to go with a big bang. Like, nope, we are going to do everything from scratch and we're going to do something. And they target to build something that's feature parity with what they have within a team that is really good at their job. However, a team that's sometimes not that experienced into these new patterns and building into the cloud, and they end up doing what we call just a lift and shift of like building an application or migrating an application from on-prem to AWS, utilizing the same pattern, the same standards, and then it's like you are resorting to a minimum common denominator between those two aspects, and you ended up with a suboptimal solution that doesn't utilize the best value of the cloud. So what I do recommend is plan in waves, and while you're planning, enable your teams to validate them to build in architectures that are better for them. Does that mean that lift and shift is horrible? No, it's not. Sometimes you have a application or something that is running on-prem that you want to move to the cloud to AWS, and you get there and you realize it's going to take you 6 months because other priorities, other things are there. And if you don't take it out of on-premise, you have to renew your lease or purchase new hardware and all of that, and that cost is not worth it. So you just go for the quick and dirty lift and shift, have it running in the cloud soon, and then you plan the modernization part. However, this should be the exception. This shouldn't be the majority of the cases. So again, enabling the teams to be able to do this. Justify to them why you're moving and ensuring that they do not feel threatened that all this knowledge that I have around VMware is going to be useless now that we go into the cloud and they're going to get rid of me. That's where the psychological safety comes again.
That is true. That is true. You mentioned serverless and, your version of serverful rather than serverless. I think it's worth noting that a lot of companies, from what I see as, as a technical consultancy, naturally, a lot of them still embrace the cloud and will be embracing the cloud, and that will probably not change in a large capacity nowhere near in the future, maybe. But a lot of them are considering moving back to on-prem, and for different reasons. either because the market is basically dominated by three cloud providers, and they have the ability to, destroy a firm's profit margin by raising their prices just like that. And some see it as a very big business risk, especially if they are like an e-commerce business, for example, where most of their business is the cloud. And some see it more as a political move, where again, those three main providers are American companies in their core and source, and they want to move away from that. From your perspective, do you see that move towards away from the clouds, where people will embrace on premises more, or is it just a corner case that is suitable for some, but probably not for most?
I think that every case is a different case. When I hear people talking about the concept of cloud repatriation, what you were talking about of moving back from cloud to on-prem, I personally haven't witnessed that movement that much.
Mm.
What I did witness is the concept of we've been trying to move to the cloud for the last 5 years, and we had this cloud first mentality. However, we start to realize that some workloads do not to be on the cloud. They were never moved to the cloud and are being moved back. It's more a change in the strategy of should everything be there, and I think that is that is a reasonable ask. I'm still to see cases where you cannot put things in the cloud because of X, Y, and Z. Because even if you have cases where I need to keep things on prem, there are still abstraction layers that we can do. For example, on AWS, we have the concept of AWS outposts, where we actually rent you a rack, a server, or a collection of things to put on your data center that is connected to the backbones of the things that we are, and you can control with it. So you have full control of the things there, but the vast majority of the stuff you can use on AWS. Because, like I said, I don't think there is a business case that I've seen so far that requires that they run entirely on-prem.
Mm.
And I'm
Not.
curious if you've seen or if you know anyone that has a justification to do that, uh, like to do it entirely, that they have zero benefits or zero workloads that they need to maintain their entire IT infrastructure. I haven't witnessed it yet.
I agree with you on that. So, like I said, the major reasons are either, political in a sense where we want to be we don't want to rely on another country's infrastructure just by default. Yes, it has a lot of benefits to do so, but as a decision that is being made, we just decide against it for, again, political reasons. Then there is the non-political, but more so the business reason of, okay, if we don't have the problem with capital, if we want to invest into our own infrastructure first and then into our own, servers for one reason or the other, for some businesses, it makes sense. But again, I do agree that it's not a zero-sum game where, it's the default definite best way of doing things. It's a decision to sacrifice a lot of convenience for a particular motivation rather than, it being the best solution for a business case. In my opinion, the best solution for most business cases is still just utilizing the cloud infrastructure that's already exists out there, especially nowadays where a lot of, business folks are very trigger happy to start implementing AI solutions into their business workflows. And without really understanding the limitations of any AI technology, like doing that on prem, still possible. There are still, open source models that can be deployed locally, and they are more secure in a lot of the ways. But in most those kinds of use cases that involve, experimentation, that involve fast prototyping, rapid prototyping, those use cases, I believe, are still should go to the cloud by default. Like
Yeah,
upfront
but
cost of running your own service is just too high.
yeah, but like even those cases in that sentence that you use there, like running a LLM on prem is more
Mm.
secure. like, I would love to challenge that because I don't think so. Like, I
Okay.
think that it's not secure if you say like I'm using a third-party API. That's it. Like they have full control of things. However, you have the data processing agreements, the appenders, and all the things that go into it. However, if you have a solution, like for example at AWS, we have the concept of AWS Bedrock, and
Mm.
that's a way that you can have foundational models. You select the model that you want to run. It runs on your own private virtual private cloud endpoint, and it's your endpoint. No one has access to it. That is very, very, very different than utilizing a AI provider endpoint that you just hit it and it's going free of the public internet, like all of it. So we're doing many of those cases with customers that they are fine tuning their own things and like doing on it. In our case, because if you want to do that on prem, you have to go to NVIDIA or something or to rent a big GPU. You're going to be paid for all the use cases, like for all the hours and all of it. With the other case, you can just experiment. You hit a endpoint as many times as you want, you pay for it, and you go back to your experiment. Because the majority of the LLMs and AI cases that I've seen, they are part of a bigger business process. And just hitting the LLM endpoint and getting a payload back is not what's going to make this better. It's increasing and improving the entire process. One example that I have is I had this customer that they were uh, receiving information from their end customers. In a sense, they had a census almost, like they gather information from thousands of companies, and they had a questionnaire that all these companies had to do. And some of these questions require proof, like, for example, do you have a diversity and inclusion efforts happening at your company now? Yes or no? If they say yes, they have to prove, and they prove that sometimes by sending a PDF or sending their strategy doc or sending some information or even typing things. How did they assess that that was happening? Yes or no? They had a battalion of interns every now and then that would come and assess that. And they thought, oh, we just need to add an LLM to this. And the LLM is going to tell us if that is proof, if that's good or no. If you just vanilla add a LLM endpoint to this and just get some output, how do you know if that's good? How do you know if that's not? Like, how does a good answer looks like? They even had cases where one person said that the proof was enough and the other person said that the proof is not enough. So if you have discrepancies amongst people that are doing it, how do you ensure that the LLM is not doing that? So it goes into mapping that processes and adding augmentation parts to it, adding flows to it that humans can be at first enhanced by utilizing these tools and then moving on with it instead of targeting to fully replace humans with LLMs. Especially because LLMs in the way that we have now with the transformers architecture are they are not going to get rid of hallucinations, like, because that's just intrinsic part of the model. So what we ended up doing there is first getting a lot of good examples. Hey, this was an answer to this question. This was the example that they did, and this is why we approve and give the reasoning on it. And we did that for like 50 good examples, 50 bad examples. Then we add that to the workflow of the LLM, build the agents on it that would validate that. And as soon as we start to get like good results of it by actually putting good humans that know what good and bad examples were in front of the output and realize it, then we started to sending things to the LLM and still have a smaller group of people actually doing sampling of the outputs and validating. As soon as they started to realize that the LLMs were making a lot of mistakes, they could pull the cord and tell, like, wait, stop, we need to review what we're doing here, what has changed. And that capacity of understanding the process, what are the bottlenecks, what it can be augmented with LLMs, all of it that requires a lot of experimentation. If you try to do this by buying a GPU and putting it on there, you're not going to be hitting that GPU, that things like all the time, because you need to do this 50, 100 times over a course of weeks to iterate on it. When you hit a point that you know that this is going to be happening there and then often and often and often, you still have ways in AWS to have reserve instance, prepay for the usage and things on it that make the cost way more sustainable for you. So that part of the LLMs and the AIs to be potentially better to run on prem. Yeah, again, there are cases. I know that there are, but I think that for the vast majority of users, they should be building things on AWS.
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you for challenging my opinion. It's very hard to argue against it. And you do bring a very good point into the variability of any model that you want to deploy and the limitations of any model that you want to use due to the nature of how those models are simply built and handled, at least for now, and at least again in most environments. And yeah, at the end of the day, I do agree with you that for like 99% or maybe 90% of use cases, the cloud is still the default solution for at least infrastructure, of course, and at most, probably just building the whole business up, just using a remote service that covers, again, like 90% of what you need, and then just fine-tuning the remaining 10% to your
Yeah,
needs, and
and
that's
it
it.
all goes down to discussions that I've been having through my entire life. That is, oh, I'm not going to do this because I need this feature that I also had on this other tool. And you go look into it and like, what is the business around it? Like, what is the actual use case? We tend to blame technology or to put requirements into technology that are not that important for the end user, or that are there because that's how we are used to do that. But if you take a step back and say, like, if I'm building this from scratch or if I'm changing this, how easier it is to do without this feature, without this requirement. Um, many times when I do migrations, modernization, I talk to customers, they start to throw like, oh, I'm just going to move this application or modernize this if I have a way of doing this specific niche feature in Node.js and that's not available yet. That's why we're still using PHP. I'm like, but is this what's holding you back? Like, you're limited to this niche feature of a specific thing. Shouldn't you be understanding the entire process? Where does it go and maybe replace that part? Like, there are many different ways to take out of it. And that's where domain driven design is so important to me and event storming is so important to me. That is about talking about the big picture of the process that you have, go deep into it to try to understand where things are at a perspective that is important for the customer, not on the technology.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. So, how do you see then the cloud evolving as the next step? Will infrastructure just be a thing in the back view mirror where people will not even remember why they would need to set up infrastructure at all? Where cloud solutions will become so over encompassing that everything will be done in the cloud, and people will just have endpoints that they connect to, and those endpoints will be numerous and specialized, and you basically will not need to do any custom development of anything at all. You just need to find the right provider, the right service, or I don't know, something else happen to the cloud.
Yeah. Then it's me, Thiago, talking about here. Like, I truly believe in the 80/20 rule. Uh, I really think that 80% of the workloads and the things can be more vanilla achievable. And one of the good things that I can talk about AWS is that we have a huge partner ecosystem that is building things on top of AWS and providing for customers. We can talk about Databricks and Snowflake and many other partners that are actually building solutions on top of AWS and providing to the customers at a higher level than if you want to create your own data platform, let's say. I think that that is the direction that the majority of the business should be striving forward. However, you still have huge enterprises that have a very, very specific custom made things. And for the last 50 years, we've been building on top of mainframes. But from the last 20 years, we've been trying to abstract it away from the mainframes because we went through the mobile phase, all of it, and we created these layers, these intermediate layers that when you actually go to your bank and you process a transaction, you go via your app. It has a huge backend, but in the end, the majority of them still go down to a mainframe to process that transaction. So we have that middle layer there. That middle layer has been modernized, is being modernized, and is going there. Now we're hitting a point that we're going to have to modernize what is underneath it. Modernizing and changing mainframes is going to be tricky. It is tricky. It is going to be daunting. And that's where AIML will come to help us on it. Because understanding that context, understanding how those applications works, and have 600,000 lines of COBOL code explain to you what this function does, it is really hard. However, if you leverage AI, if you leverage, for example, on AWS, we have Q Transform for VMware, for Key Transform for mainframes, where we actually analyze all the code and give you an explanation of what is doing what. And that capacity to process that amount of information and give you a reasonable idea of what your code is doing is going to be crucial. For that part, I don't think we're going to be able to just replace with an endpoint. That's where the 80-20 rule will apply. We are still going to have weird custom made applications that need to be done. New ones that we're building, but also revamping the old mainframe ones that are so reliable, that have been holding our society together for a long time. However, it's getting to an end of life situation because the people that actually know about it, that actually build that code, are retired, are moving away from it. So I think that cloud is going towards a solution that we're going to have the building blocks at different layers. You're still going to have the capacity to have your rack server like we do with AWS outposts and build things from scratch. If you want to go one layer above and utilize something similar to VMs, you can do it. If you want to go a layer above and then utilize something as a containers running on a Kubernetes, you can do it. If you want to go for serverless or service full applications using Lambda and all of it, you can do it. If you want to have managed databases, you can do it. If you want to put it all together and have a data platform, you can probably leverage Databricks. You can probably leverage Snowflake, things that are built on top of these building blocks. And I think that that is the direction that we have been going for the last 20 years. And that's the direction that we will continue to go. No ops, no infra, it's impossible. We always need, because the majority of the parts of infra that we do, it's not just tech, like I said, it's people and processes. Those things will still need to be in place.
The Pareto principle rules all, I guess, in the end of the day. But, time will tell, of course, where we are headed. And from a layman's perspective, definitely not a cloud expert. But it does make sense when you describe it. It does make sense. And yeah, I am re-examining my personal biases of looking at the cloud as this like one big thing and downplaying the role of smaller services that go into it and how many of them there are currently and how ubiquitous they are and how many use cases they have, and that infrastructure is only growing and growing and growing and probably should not stop growing at any time soon. So yeah, having that wealth of choice basically, having so many options, being accessible immediately to so many use cases, so many people, it makes sense as a vision of the future. So we will see, I guess. We will see. So then, to kind of bring our discussion to a close, we've touched on AI a little bit, but the algorithm will hate me if I do not talk about AI. How do you feel? What's the best way of integrating AI's solutions or ML solutions into existing systems? The best way of doing it?
Yeah, this is something that comes close to heart. Like, I studied theoretical math back at the university and statistics and probability. So I've been doing statistical learning and working on this for a long time. Uh, and on one hand, I feel bad about the traditional machine learning, the traditional statistical learning things that we have that are left out. Support vector machines, regressions, even going into the early phases of deep learning as in random forest, all of it, they are still extremely valuable. Uh, I work it in many prediction cases, in many classification spaces, supply chains optimizations, like all of it. That like what we're doing now with LLMs, it's not required for those kind of situations. Like maybe we can get to a point that is going to perform better or even as good as what we have there now, but the amount of processing, the amount of stuff, and the changes that you need to make is not necessary. So, if there is one thing that I can tell people is that regular ML, this is still important, and this is still going to do a lot of things that we're doing in companies. However, it's been left out for its last 2 years and a half, since I don't know 29th of November 2022 when ChatGPT came online and take the world by surprise by people that were not aware of the capacity of it. Since that day, yeah, more and more people are paying attention to that side of Gen AI LLMs and less to the old one. However, there's still a lot of use cases and a lot of things that should be solved by traditional machine learning. In the Gen AI, in the LLM part, uh, I think it is a fantastic tool, but I like to compare it to a battalion of interns. Have an army, you have an army of interns that can answer to you, like almost like you have millions of interns coming together, coming to a consensus on how they should answer to you. They can do research for you, they can do things for you. However, they are mainly white males at Reddit that always propose their ideas as they are always right, because that's the nature of the LLMs of that we have now. And that's where, with a pinch of salt, you should have things coming with it. So I think more tools and more ways are going to come into guardrail the usage of AI, and how to make it more responsible, and how to make it more source oriented, where when it gives you an explanation, you can ask like, hey, fact check this and give me this source of it. And that comes also from the concept of AI literacy. People need to be more literate about the use of AI, about how to do better prompt, about how to check things, about how to work on it. And that's one important thing that and a concept that when we see companies starting to use LLMs is, what is the expectation that you have here? And when I hear like, I want to replace my entire department, this workforce or this with agents and AI, all of it, I always like, wait. Let's take a step back, because for some use cases you can do that, but for the vast majority, you can't. You still need to supervise it. Uh, so what I think it could be happening in the future is pivotal change in the way that the network architecture happens. So before 2017, we didn't know about the transformers with the Google paper, the attention is all you need, that changed the way that we see stuff. Everything was a little bit stuck. That gave us like a pivotal moment of change. Now we're getting to that plateau phase again with the concepts that we have. You even saw Sam Altman this week already talking about, well, it's not going to be replacing developers. It's going to be augmenting, making them 10x developers. There's already a change on it to a more plateauish situation. And at some point, might be tomorrow, might be in 10 years, there's going to be a fundamental change in the way that we build this that is going to take it to another level. I wish I knew when, I wish I knew what, but that will happen at some point, and we're going to be able to do more things with it. However, nowadays, it is a really, really good sparring partner, a really, really good conversation, a really, really good way to think out of the box. However, its lack of accuracy, its lack of way to control the fact checking of its outputs, because you can increase the context window as you like, you're still going to have problems because we have contradictions in human content. So we're going to have contradictions in a LLM that is trained on it. So the expertise is not going to die. However, the entry level of a lot of things are going to diminish because the way that you can absorb content and filter content and do things is changing. And I hope that that means that people can focus more on the business side of their problems, focus on the fast flow of change, going back to the team topologies thing, to be more stream aligned, to reduce their cognitive load and move forward. However, there are some studies that have been sharing that our decision-making process, when we rely too much on LLM outputs, are diminishing, and that's the alarming side of the equation.
So then, what would your advice be to leaders that are looking to implement AI solutions, and maybe even broader than just AI solutions, for leader looking to build robust technical infrastructures with robust cultures that prioritize ownership? And I know, very easy question to answer, but like one advice that you would give to such leaders, like what do you think they need to do to succeed?
Be empathetic and be kind. That's the most important thing that I can tell people. Everything else will follow from it.
That's some great advice. I will try and follow it myself to the best of my ability, at the very least. Thank you, Thiago. Thank you very much for your insights. Thank you for talking on team topologies and the cloud and AI and anything and everything in between. And thank you all for listening to us as well today. If you liked what you heard, what you saw, please like, share, follow us, and subscribe to us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. If you find us anywhere else, subscribe to us there as well. It really does help. And see you next time when we discuss something maybe as interesting, but probably not more interesting than what we've discussed here today. Thank you all, and bye bye.